Irashaimase! Hello and welcome to Fataris' Kitchen. I'm your host, Chef Fataris. It's time once again for Shoot 'em Up Saturday, and on the menu this week we have Nova Strike, a roguelite vertical scrolling shmup. What kind of taste will it have? Let's get cooking and find out. From developer Sonic Games, Nova Strike released in July of 2023 for the PC, the PlayStation 5, the Xbox Series, and the Nintendo Switch, which is the version we're looking at today. This title is a roguelite that has a lot of promising elements, but at the end of the day, it's one I can't recommend as I feel there's too much underbaked. Basically, some of my problems have to do largely with its scaling, as for a proper roguelite, I feel you have to have a decent scaling progression, and that's one thing Nova Strike doesn't have. In addition to that, there's just too many points throughout the course of a playthrough where the action and just the gameplay and the whole feel of it just comes across as dull, which is a problem for shoot 'em up in general. So let's dive into the game itself. I'll kind of explain why I feel this way throughout the course of the video. Starting the game, we're taken to our central hub, basically our main menu. From here, when you're starting a run, you can visit the upgrade shop and spend points you've accrued from previous runs on upgrades that you can equip in the equipment section. But for our purposes today, we're just going to start a run. When you're first starting out, you'll only have Chapter 1 available and the game will just put you straight in there. However, if you've unlocked additional chapters, you can select those chapters from here, but it will cost you some points from previous runs. There's an issue with that though. You'd be starting those runs off basically with your base equipment, and it could be quite challenging to start a chapter later in the game with no upgrades. We'll get to that in a moment. Starting Chapter 1, we're dropped into Stage 1-1, and for the moment I've left the ship equipped with just its basic loadout. So this is how you would start the game the first time you're playing through. So you've got your movement, and we've got our primary shot. The primary shot has a decent fire rate to it, and some relatively okay damage, but even for these base tank units, it does take a few shots to take them out. As we defeat enemies, the enemies will drop coins that we can use on the pop-up shops that come up throughout the course of a run. So we'll see those here the first time at the end of Stage 1-3, but we'll see some of the other roguelite elements before that. So one thing to note, the game is procedurally generated, so each time you start it up, it's going to be a different combination of enemies and stages. A good way for me, or in my mind, to look at procedural generation, think of it as a deck of cards that's your stage, and you can build that stage from any set of cards. Depending on which ones you pull out, you'll have different enemy placement, different stage background elements, that sort of thing. That's a good way to look at what procedural generation kind of is. So once we've completed all the various sections that make up our stage, we're taken to the end of our stage, and this is one element I do really like about this game. So we've got two choices presented to us. This is very Hades-like, where we can choose, do we want to take the left path and go for a bonus weapon, or do we want to take the right path and go for a bonus chip? So one of the additional things we can equip to the ship are two sub-weapons. That's what the bonus weapon would be. But we can also aim for additional equipment to make the ship more powerful. That's the bonus chip. Between these two, in my opinion, you should go for the bonus chip, as that's the only way you can get additional chips throughout the course of the run, either there or the shop, whereas the sub-weapons we can get as drops, or we can also buy those from the shop as well. So it's important to destroy as many enemies as possible so we get those coins so we can purchase the items at the shop itself. So in addition to coins, enemies will also occasionally drop health pickups, which will vary from small, medium, or large, and once we have sub-weapons, ammo pickups, which also go small, medium, and large. And until we get to the end of the stage, that's basically the basics of the gameplay. So we can start talking about some of the things, other elements I do really like about the game itself. So one of the things I do really like is the mech design for all the various enemies. The ground tanks, the flying enemies, the larger capital ships that we're fighting all have a really good design. And although there's not a ton of them throughout the course of the game, I like the design of basically all the enemies that that are being thrown at us throughout the course of our gameplay. So already you might have recognized some of the sections that we're encountering from the earlier in the run. Let's take a quick moment to talk about the life system for this game. So rather than have a life, one hit, and that's it sort of thing, the game has a shield health setup. So you've got a blue health bar there at the bottom, that's your shields, and then we have a red bar that's our health. So the shields, when we're not taking damage, will regenerate, but and that's our first line of defense. However, once we start, we've depleted our shield, we'll be taking health damage, and of course, if you lose all your health, it's game over, and we're back to the hub. With some points that we've earned from our, calculated from both how far we got as well as what we got in the game. At the end of the stage here, as I mentioned, we chose a bonus chip, and this one gives us a weapon supercharger. That could be a good choice to equip. So this is the first time we have our equipment menu available in game. So we can go into here, and a lot of these chips that I have available were upgrades you can purchase in the upgrade shop from the main hub. The one we just got was the supercharger. So here we can see it increases the firepower of our shot by 50% or 75%, but it reduces the firing rate by 50%. So not the greatest upgrade, but one I do feel is worth it, as we can deal that much more damage to enemies. Alternatively, there's one upgrade from the base game which increases the firing rate by 50%, but reduces the power by 30%. It'd be wonderful to try combining these two together, but one thing that the game does have is each of these upgrades has a category, and you can only have one of each category equipped. So the weapon supercharger is in the firing category, so this weapon repeater is also firing, and thus it's blacked out. In addition to that, we have these weapons that we could potentially equip, like this missile burst. And this one isn't a passive, but rather it's an active. When you select an active, we're given the option of equipping it to one of the triggers or bumps, depending on what your preference is. So we'll throw this missile burst on the right trigger. We also have some repairs, we have some stealth options, some movement options, and some resource passives. So you have a power bar with basically the slots of what you can equip for the upgrades on the right. At this point I have up to 12 slots. Initially you'll only start with 4, and you can purchase upgrades either in the course of a run, but those ones will only be for the run, or at the upgrade shop for a permanent increase. So we'll also take this magnetic harvester, which will suck in chips from further away, basically coins, and we'll take this active repair just to help with survival. Now we find ourselves significantly more powerful. We'll still take the bonus chip, as I feel getting powerful upgrades is better than having more money in this game. So our shot is now slower, but it should be decently more powerful than it was before. And indeed, it looks like a couple shots take out these planes versus the 3 it took before. The tanks still take 3, unfortunately. I was hoping for a bit better. Ah, that's great. So that taking out that ship dropped us our first sub-weapon. We now have a 3-way gun that we can use. The 3-way gun helps add quite a bit of firepower to our kit, but one thing to note is it does take ammunition. So you can see there in the bottom next to our skills that we've equipped, there's a 34 of 45, so it's got 45 shots total, and the 34 is what the ammo is down to, so it can go quite quickly. The sub-weapons are a great way to increase our strength and damage, but one problem that the game does have is that the pickups to replenish that ammunition is randomly dropped by the enemy. So sometimes you'll get quite a few in the course of a stage, other times it'll be very stingy. So let's talk a little bit about the active items we've got. So we've got 2 active skills equipped now. The one of which is like a health pickup, so that one we can use to refill our health. I was just down a tick, but just to go and show you how like the refresh works on these. And then the other one is a missile barrage. Both very useful. Once you've used those skills, the icons for them will start refilling. However, it's based off of damage dealt to enemies. So we just got another equipment coated armor, but this is the first time we have a pop-up store available. So we'll select the pop-up store, and in here we can pick up certain chips or like upgrades. These ones are always fixed, you'll always have the same. And as we play through the game, we'll unlock additional options once we get to stage 2, or chapter 2 rather, chapter 3, and there's a little bit more at the end as well, so I'm assuming there's a chapter 4. The resources we can use to replenish our health or replenish the ammo, and there's also the weapons themselves. So here we can see all 9 of the sub-weapons available, and where I have enough money, I'm going to equip the sub-weapons that I prefer. So the dual gun is my favorite for base weapon, and if we're talking about like for fighting bosses, I really like the railgun. The missile launcher doesn't deal quite enough damage, I feel, for what it is. The laser gun just burns through ammo too fast, and the grenade launcher is great, but once again, not enough ammo. So from here, if you wanted to equip like additional items, you could either exit out of the store and then move over to the equipment, or we can jump straight over to the equipment screen. And we can see from here that pickup that we just got, the coated armor, is a health pickup, increases HP by 25%. We don't have any other health power-ups turned on, so we could either turn that one on, or we could turn on the one we already have, which will actually give us 50 HP. Or 50% more HP. Then once again we have choices: more resources, bonus weapon, or bonus chip. We'll go bonus chip. So of the chapters, there are 7 stages total. So here we find ourselves halfway through. So just kind of like we've already kind of got the base of the gameplay down. So at this point, I'm going to jump to the end of the chapter, and we'll kind of like pick things back up at the end of stage 1-6. Alright, here we find ourselves approaching the end of stage 1-6. So we've got some additional enemies visible that we can show off. So this one here in the middle is another one of the large cap enemies that we'll occasionally see throughout the course of the run. It has homing missiles as well as some additional shots, providing a decent challenge. It also takes a lot of HP. So I am using my dual gun quite a bit. I'll show that one off here a little bit. One thing I forgot to mention, I think, is that you can only have 2 sub-weapons equipped at a time. So if you happen to pick up an additional sub-weapon, you can swap between them freely. You have to discard that one sub-weapon to pick up the other, and it does give you a decent amount of time to make that choice. So should that come up in the heat of battle, you likely have enough time to finish up cleaning up the enemies you have, and then swap over your sub-weapon to the sub-weapon that you would most want. So here we find ourselves with another pop-up store, as well as this chip that I just obtained. What do we got? Extended magazine. That's actually really good. So before we go into the shop itself, first we're going to go into the submenu and equip some things that we would necessarily want. So the extended magazine increases the ammo for a weapon by 50%. So say the dual gun has 60 rounds of ammunition, that will give it 30 rounds or 30 additional rounds, so 90 total. But for that to work, we're going to have to change up our loadout and drop something that we've got so we can actually have that there. So the one that makes the most sense in my mind is to take off the magnetic harvester. We can collect the coins ourselves easily enough. That takes us down to 10 and 12, and we can equip the extended magazine. In addition to that, on one of the previous stages, I got this awesome Aegis system. This basically creates a shield around us if we don't take damage for 10 seconds, so it's an additional shield. Very useful to have. So I should have just gone through the menu, but this is one way you can do it. You can go back over the stage. So here we can go and purchase additional ammunition for both our railgun, which I was able to get via a drop, as well as our dual gun. If we needed to, we could also fill out our HP. We're only down 1 though, so I think we're in decent shape. And when you're at the end of stage 6, you'll just have one option for your gate, and this will take us to our boss. So if you've been paying attention, one thing that is another issue I have with the game is throughout the stages, the music is the same for the entire stage, including the boss fight. So I really wish that they'd at least shaken it up for the boss. The tune itself wasn't bad, but it does get a little bit old at this point. So this boss fight itself is a pretty good example of where I feel they could like improve things in the game. So we've got all these sections on this train that are firing at us, and it doesn't matter how much damage we deal to an individual section. It continues to like shoot at us. Especially this like center turret here is like the most notable like element of that. It's not possible to destroy sections like you would expect until the HP gets to a certain point for this fight, and then we'll progress further into the fight itself. In addition, one major element or issue I take with the boss fights is in a scenario where we have a boss that we want to use our sub-weapons on, there's no way for us to really recover the sub-weapon ammunition from like this boss. There aren't any enemies that are coming up that with drops or no drops like given to us throughout the course of a run. So once we've used up our say railgun ammunition, for example, that would be it. Fortunately, the railgun's actually extremely powerful, so we can take out the boss quickly without running out of ammunition, but that's a problem I have run in the past. So with that, we have the chapter clear, and we'll be given a brief summary of our performance. So you do get bonuses for destroying all enemies in a stage as well as not taking any damage. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get that, but we can also see our total number of enemies destroyed and the coins we collected, and all of our various power-ups. It also took 19 minutes to get through that, and that's where I feel like the game can kind of get dull. Is it just the same thing kind of over and over again without enough variation to shake things up. So between chapters, we find ourselves back at the hub, and here we can visit a power-up store that's available. Through that, we also see some of the upgrades that are available. So now we've got additional chips available in the shop, like this safeguard field, emergency barriers, overcharged weapon systems, things like this, as well as some additional like shield regen, that sort of thing. We also have the medium health and armor packs, like or ammo packs rather, available, so we'll go ahead and refill our sub-weapons and we should be good to go. We can also swap around the equipment like normal, but in this case we'll just continue and we'll be on to chapter 2. New background, new music fortunately, and some additional enemies. So that brings me to the closing of my video, and as I mentioned at the beginning, this is just a title that I can't recommend because at the end of the day there's just too many of like the elements in here. Although they're good, it feels that they're just half-baked. And as we are in stage like chapter 2 now, you can kind of see the enemies have like gotten a lot stronger. There are a lot of enemies that are throwing a lot of firepower at me, but I'm not really all that much stronger than I was at the beginning of the game. And that's where one of the big problems that comes into the game is like lack of scaling. So let's talk about the positives first, the plus flavors. So I really love the mech design, the pixel art, and like some of the background design as well, although the background does repeat a lot, so that does get samey. But especially like World like 2, or rather Chapter 2, I feel like looks great. But that's kind of where a lot of that ends. And then the choices that you have at the end of the stage for choosing a different like path, I really love that kind of option for a shoot 'em up. So I feel like that could be really great. But the minus flavors are the big problem, and we might talk about those for just a little bit. So the first thing to note is that it's just like 19 minutes to go and play through the first chapter before we got to our first boss is definitely excessive. In addition to that, as I mentioned, we haven't really powered up much at all, and this is basically where we're going to be. Throughout the course of my gameplay, I haven't found many other chips that give us more power than what we currently have. So we've got something to attack with, something to restore with, but other than maybe trying a few other active weapons and dropping a lot of the passives, I can't think of how else we could potentially increase the strength of our particular ship and have a better chance against all these additional really cool enemies that the game is throwing at us. In addition to that, I am being lucky with the ammo drops right now, but if I'm using my sub-weapons a lot, sometimes you just don't get any drops at all. You'll be at 0 ammunition and have only your main shot to rely on. That can be a problem when we're swarmed by a lot of enemies that are just basically filling the screen with bullets flying our direction. So that's the next big C- flavor I have for it is just lack of scaling in our firepower. So it would have been great if, say, the sub-weapons had just replaced our main weapon, or if there was an additional scaling, maybe if we could go and equip multiple firing options or multiple weapons of the same category, or multiple upgrades rather of the same category, that could potentially help with that scenario and make our base shot or our defense or what have you, what we would want to upgrade to survive, that much better. And then really we're kind of just left to the randomness of the whole procedurally generated system, where sometimes we're gonna get a chip that we'd really want, sometimes we're not. Oftentimes the ammo drops are gonna be good for us, but a lot of times there won't be, and we'll just have to save our money to purchase the upgrades in the shop itself. So that's not necessarily a good feeling, but at the end of the day, the biggest problem that I have with Nova Strike is that it's just not that exciting of a shoot 'em up. It just feels dull overall, and that's why it's not a title that the chef can recommend. Alright, that'll just about wrap it up for this week's episode of Shoot 'em Up Saturday. As always, I want to thank you so much for joining us this week. I hope you have a wonderful week yourself, and I look forward to seeing you again next time.